Hey everyone, this is Tom, and this week's character is Eraamion Firel for Frulimin. Just wanted to apologize in advance in case I come across as loopy or groggy. I had surgery earlier this week and I'm still recovering from that, so if I sound sick or start saying things that don't make sense, try to be patient with me, and hopefully I'll be able to sit through this whole thing, but I'm feeling pretty good, so it should go pretty well. I just want to make sure I get it out on time for you guys. So anyway, last week was no theme week, so an elf won. Feels like it's been a long time since we had an elf. Near the start, it was almost like it felt like every week was a human, an elf, or a half elf. But either way, it's no big deal. One thing I've been caught saying before is, like, even if it turned out that everybody played as an elf, the challenge would remain the same. Because even though everybody is an elf, people would think, that's kind of boring. They're all the same thing, and I think that. I mean, I can see where they're coming from. It makes sense, but I think that it's just they just lack imagination or empathy. I think that if you have a whole group of characters or people or whatever, and they've all got this one arbitrary thing in common, you're still going to have as much range within each individual as you would from any other handful of monsters and races and species and whoever you've got. So either way, it is nice to come back to just a classic elf. We've been doing a lot of more monstery stuff lately, and that's all really my favorite stuff. But it is nice to just come back to an elfy sort of thing. Although even last week was pretty much just an elf. But either way. Excuse me. So with this week, I went about things a little bit differently, where I started off without doing the skeleton and muscular system, at least not as rigorously as I typically do. I still draw with accounting for them, but I felt like I wanted something a little bit more, not, I guess, sort of free, more personality, I guess. I'm not sure. I'm just a little bit nervous about doing all that really rigorous stuff for so long and so consistently. Is starting to be a little bit of a hindrance, and I want it, and just in case it is or not. I mean, the knowledge gained is very useful. I've learned a lot doing this, but I'm just thinking that it might be time to start breaking things up a little bit and going about things this way. It allows some more room for some stylization and some posture and some and just in case it's happening, just a little bit less formulaity with the anatomy, and thinking about the body as more of this, drawing it sort of all at the skin level at one time. My theory is that it'll have a bit more of a holistic approach or a feel to the body, where when you can see the finished legs and the finished belly and the finished shoulders all at the same time, you can sort of, and just like, or whatever random sampling of parts, there might be something I'll be able to pick up on that'll help give their bodies a bit more distinction and personality and flavor. So we'll see how it goes, and it's a fun way to draw. I've noticed that in my sketchbook that I have in my notepad at work, a lot of my doodles I've just been drawn to just going straight to the surface level anatomy and poses, and just having fun drawing weird poses and things. And I think doing this will help me apply the stuff that I've been developing, and I'll learn from it in a different way. So I'll always be considering the anatomy stuff, but I think I'm going to try this out for a few more times and see how it feels, see if it's actually helping. I mean, also, it definitely helps to be pushed towards stylization, especially after last week's guest artist Joy Ang did the Nephrin Ka, and that was just such a breath of fresh air with just how stylized it was. I don't know if I'll ever get that far out, but it was just so nice to see that take place. And excuse me again. And I would love to just have that kind of whimsy to my stuff. I want my art to look fun. You know, I don't mean like cartoony or silly, but which is fine. And I don't think Joyce is silly or anything. But I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's just so much styles are so much more interesting than non-styles. So even at this stage too, like with this skull, I've mentioned before, like trying to set out a unique face from the skeletal level at this point. And this one I purposely did do. I drew the skull slightly amorphous from how I typically draw skulls. I have a hunch that a lot of my skulls are really similar looking, and I want to start allowing myself to play with that and warp that and try out different sort of understructures. And I think this is going to work out. And in the case of Eraamion, man, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. I went for something with, I gave him taller eye sockets and a narrower face and jawbone than I normally would, just to kind of see how that would play out. In one of my latest videos, I talked about how if you study the facial anatomy and all the structures underneath the skin, like the bones and the muscles, then you're going to have your command over facial expressions and even individual facial uniqueness and appearance is just going to skyrocket. Just because if you're just building it out of the parts that have to be there, and it's up to you how they're arranged, then you're not going to be just reciting the same features over and over again. And this was, I think this was a fun place to try that out, and I'm going to definitely push that and keep working with that as I go. It is a little bit creepy having just this flesh body with the skull head on it. But yeah, it's all still there. I mean, in my mind, when I'm at this point, I can at least see enough of a face in my imagination that I'm not too put off by it. But I wouldn't be surprised if somebody had to, pencil something in. So even in this case, one of the benefits of skipping the in-depth anatomical stage is that it did save quite a bit of time, and that's something that I'm always looking for as a skill in myself. I think that every artist needs to learn what works for them to speed up their process, and how can they get the results they want more quickly, more efficiently. That's always a huge bonus for any artist, and I mean, I'm trying to do the same thing every time too. I'm very rarely taking any drastic steps, and when I do, and it's sort of the same thing with everything, is if you're trying to fix something, whether it's in your life or in your art or whatever, you do it by changing one thing at a time. Like if you are having symptoms of a cold or something, don't try like ginger tea, lemon squares, and 6 hours of sleep and a run, like a 3-kilometer run or something. Don't do all those on the same day. You try one out for a few days each day, and then you see if it doesn't work and you move on. And then that's sort of the case with how I function with these videos, where like I'll tweak something, or I'll sort of do things how I feel comfortable, and then do something with it that sort of differs from it quite a bit. Just one sort of thing at a time. And even I guess in this one it would just be drawing the anatomy, skin first, like sort of getting right to it much more quickly, and then and even just penciling in the costume here just on one layer from early get-go. Now another reason I'm doing this is because Fruleman sent me a bit of concept art from an Elder Scrolls game. I don't know which one. I think Elder Scrolls Online says in the URL of the reference image, but excuse me. And it was sort of like these robes that they've always sort of pictured their character wearing. So the costume that I'm doing is leaned towards those quite a bit. So I did have already some pretty good reference, but it's just even a good reminder that when you are using reference, and I always recommend historical reference for your own work, and that's have it ready beforehand. Which, I mean, if I'm using reference, I always do. I always make sure that I've got like a little folder that I just cycle through with Windows Picture Viewer or whatever the default is. But yeah, just having that laid out, having an idea in mind, having a trajectory is really crucial to concept art and drawing in general. Because if you're just sitting there trying to draw random shapes and trying to come up with what might look cool, it's going to be slow going, because every single detail or aspect that you add is going to be on the chopping block, because the more other features you add, the more those have to line up with what you've already done, and the easier it is for those to contradict what you've already done and to lose consistency and become mayhem. And so when you work that way, everything kind of underwrites itself right off the bat. And so if you have just a clearer idea, just a more grounded idea from the get-go, you'll have a much clearer sense of what you can include, how you can tweak things, how to make room for stuff, having a good sense of what has to be there or what just won't work. And that just comes from doing the research ahead of time. I mean, it's not really a surprise to do research ahead of time, but there is a functional, practical method to it, or benefit to it. I hope that makes sense. Once again, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments below, or on Twitter at R&D Fantasy. I love answering questions and trying to help out in any way I can. So yeah, even here, just after doing so many facial muscles sketches, just having the awareness, and this happens for any aspect of the anatomy, is the more that you study the anatomy, the more you understand every single one of those subtle little bumps that shows up on a face or on a body, and why it's there and how big it should be, and if it should be flexing or more pronounced in this pose or not. It's one thing that has always driven me nuts about doing long poses or portraits that are realistic, and doing pretty much anything that's a realistic style, at least in the past, is the more you look at a face, the more it seems like there's just unlimited detail, and the more details you notice, the more you emphasize them, and the more you emphasize, the more you emphasize the subtle ones, and then you just get this big, ugly mess of a face. But if you know what each little bump is, and there's not that many, it's actually pretty easy. If you spent like an evening or like a day, or of course the more time you can spend, the better, but just really, like, let's say a weekend, or let's do 3 hours a night, 5 days a week for a week, just doing facial anatomy drawings with skulls and muscles on top of the skulls. You're gonna be able to draw every little subtle bump and lump and wrinkle, and you'll understand why facial features have little bumps here and there that you wouldn't otherwise notice, and everything will just have so much more vitality and expressiveness and uniqueness to it. I would even make that like a little challenge for yourself if you're working on this sort of stuff. Just do 3 hours a night. Well, that's actually, start off with 1 hour a night for 5 days in a row, and see how you do, see how it feels, and then work up to 8 hours a night, 7 days a week, and there you go. I'm just kidding. You don't have to do it that much. So yeah, just lots of little just hemming and hawing with the hair. This is kind of one thing that's been driving me crazy, is white hair. I didn't know that it would be this tough. This character and the last one both have silver white hair, and it's really difficult to color correctly. I don't see people with white hair very often, and when I do, it's not long. I mean, there's lots of reference online and everything, but a lot of my old tricks don't seem to really work. But it's always just keep on doing. Of course, got to make the feet look bigger. It's just not the same without big feet. Big feet just look better on a character, I think. And it's totally just my own weird eyeballs. So this is getting worked out. I'll go over his the character write-up, and then I can start explaining some of the choices I've made and what I've done here. So anyway, Character is a male elf called Eraamion Firaal. Eraamion Firaal. He's 94 years old and is quite tall and slender, standing around 1.9 meters, and weighs about 59 kilograms. He has iris. Oh, excuse me. Not the yawn curse again. Okay. He has irisless, pupilless, emerald green eyes and long, flowing silver hair, as well as a mouth that always seems inclined towards a smile, and pale skin. He has a scar from a long sword slash on his forehead. He wears ornately decorated dark blue robes. I'd always imagine them to be similar to these ones, with the link to the image, with the sign of a purple dragon on them. Black gloves, functional leather boots. Eraamion usually wields a dwarven wand. I imagine this being made of some kind of stone and inlaid with sapphires. Has his hawk familiar perched on his shoulder, which I sort of sadly didn't have time to add the familiar. He is also known for keeping a long and detailed journal of his adventures, which he adds to whenever he gets the chance. With regards to his stats, he's lawful good, level 7 divination wizard with 8 strength, 16 dexterity, 13 constitution, 18 intelligence, 12 wisdom, and 10 charisma. His go-to spells are Firebolt, Shocking Grasp, Shield, and Fireball. Short backstory. His first memory is of waking up in a cave or so, 6 or so years prior to the start of the campaign, with his only possessions being a magically bound book which he assumes holds the secrets of his past, an old spell book, and a bag with some rations. He wandered the world for a year, teaching himself magic and trying to learn about the world he was in before arriving in Cormier. He settled down there and began working for the state as an investigator and war wizard. He did this for a few years before being assigned to investigate the threat of an orc horde. An orc horde growing in a neighboring land, which he took gladly, hoping it would somehow allow him to learn more about himself. He's generally seen as a kind and forgiving person, believing in granting mercy to even the races of the world that are usually seen as intrinsically evil. He believes that knowledge is power, and so prefers to find out everything he can about a situation instead of acting recklessly. Since he can't remember his upbringing and spent most of his time in a human nation, he's less aloof and impulsive than the average elf. Sorry if this is too much information. No, this is definitely enough information. Very good. There's about 4 or 5 paragraphs, and that's fine. I'm used to getting like 3 or 4 pages, which I would call that probably a little bit too much. But every little bit helps. If you ever, when you're sending me this stuff, every little bit of info that you can tell me helps out, because there's always going to be clues. There's always going to be stuff that that can crop up, and I can go into that later. But before, even just with this painting thing that I've got here, I just went and took a picture by Ilya Repin, one of my favorite painters. He's the guy in that other video. I did the same thing where I took one of his paintings and I used that as just an underpainting for what I was going to be doing. I see this as a time-saving measure because, as I've described before, it's sort of like once I get a painting to a point where I'm just pushing and pulling color around, and I've got every sort of color sample that I need, and I can just paint and dab, and I don't have to pick anything new. I feel that that's really like a sweet spot where things just get drawn so much more easily. So what I've tried before is just taking a painting, and one from art history. I wouldn't take like a photo or something from contemporary sources. It just feels dirty. But and just taking that and then painting on top of that, color sampling a couple things here and there to get the ball rolling, and it saves a lot of time, and it really helps things move along a lot better. And it's nice to have that sort of underpaint and texture underneath. It eventually gets washed out, but as you gradually build up your own colors and tones and values, it goes away, but it does help having something laid out underneath. It's just this weird principle where whenever you're painting over something, it's going to work out better and easier. So if you can just synthesize that, that's my theory anyway. If I can just if I can just artificially inject that stage, or like just, it's sort of like using performance enhancing drugs. But if I if I can just trick my brain into thinking I'm already at this stage, it can save me some time. And that's my theory anyway. And I think it kind of works. So I definitely want to try it out more in the future. But yeah, I just wanted something with some... Oh, goodness. Sorry for all the yawning. But just something with a warm blue nature. I mean, with the blue jacket that he's got described, it's always good in a fantasy to push that blue to more of a warm blue. Something with a little bit of yellow in it, like a little bit of a mustardiness. Really rich blues, like ultramarine blues. Those existed in the past. But those were... I mean, ultramarine didn't come about for a long time, and I don't even know if that was used in fabrics much, except for paint. It probably was, but they were really expensive stuff, really fancy, upper class stuff. So it'd be really weird. It'd be weird to see it on a investigator's jacket. So something a bit more, sort of this route would do. I wonder if you could get a color this dark with woad. Woad has a nice color to it. It does have a slightly greenish color to it, but it sort of, as it gets exposed to oxygen, it turns blue. So it sort of starts off green and then, or like yellow, and then it goes and turns blue and stuff. But I've never seen anybody dye it super dark, at least not to my knowledge. But this pigment just seems a lot more natural and attainable to me. So being with this jacket, it is mostly one color, except for a few parts that change in the future. So it's really mostly about rendering it out and getting the forms right. Trying to keep on top of volumetric shadows and cast shadows to give it a sense of depth and layers and flaps. I picture like an investigator war wizard would be someone who's out in the field quite a lot, going around talking to stuff. In my mind, I'm picturing someone a bit like Columbo, although not as grungy and grimy as Columbo. But I picture in this sort of case a jacket that felt a bit more like a duster would be appropriate, or it's sort of like a medievalized version of a trench coat, or it's just a bit more heavy material and sharper angles and more embroidered. And I mean, if he's going to be a wizard, he's got to have some of this fanciness to it. And for the most part, my inspiration was, with him being described as a war wizard, it was a combination of that reference photo that he gave me, but I can't just take that whole hog. I needed to try to find something that sort of captured the spirit of it, something that wouldn't like betray Fruleman's expectation of that, but I can't just try to. I got to make it something noticeably, distinctly my own. So I took that and then looked up some photos of like World War I trench coats, something a bit more old-timey than even World War II. Something, even just seeing like, I mean, it didn't come up much in this image, but even just getting a sense of like the kind of fabrics that were there and how beat up and crinkly they were, and even like the thickness of the fabric and how that affects the folds. Trying to just get a good sense of it. I picture this guy's jacket having like sound effects when it moves. Like they'd have to do like a stage in Foley, like if it was in a movie. It would be just a really big, heavy sort of jacket. A little bit of like twinkling sound effects or jingling, something a bit cowboyish, but he gets there. So even in this one too, I didn't do an occlusion layer. I basically just did everything painterly style. Everything just painted on a new layer, every color, every render, every shade. Sort of breaking a lot of my old rules, but I really just wanted to try to power through this one. I didn't just enjoy it. I actually kind of liked it. It was an enjoyable process. Another thing too to watch out for is, I say it a lot, just always trying to avoid same faceism. where every face is drawn the same. And I think that if somebody like it's hard if not impossible for an individual to see it in their own work, but I have a huge suspicion that if somebody looked at all my characters for this all together, they could tell like the characters would all look very similar. They would look all almost related. And my mission is to try to avoid that. It's okay if it looks like they're painted by me, but I just want them to all look like they're from very different groups and families and just not the same thing. Especially after all this ranting and raving I do about people drawing characters that look the exact same. But even in this one, I did feel good about it moving with that taller, slender skull. Especially, I mean, Eraamion is described as being taller and slender, so pushing that a bit, I think it helps him out quite a bit with having like a taller and slenderer face. And even like the line caused by his cheekbone and his I don't remember what it's called, but the main jaw muscle there, even something like that, plus the very like lean sort of area around his mouth, that sort of stuff things like that, things related to that come up on other characters, but I think he's the one that's got that the most out of all the characters so far. So even stuff like that is nice to include. And that all started just from the skeletal level. I didn't know exactly that's how it would turn out, but once I was in that range, I wanted to push that and make sure his face had that long, slender, very lean, elven look to it. So yeah, lots of just subtle rendering here and there. A lot of figuring out too. The face did get a little bit awkward just with the different colors and layers and stuff, and trying to find the right skin tone was a challenge, but I got there. Yeah, just lots of figuring and doing. So, while this is rendering out, I do have a few questions from today. I went out onto Twitter and called for people to ask me some questions so I can go through those. So I'll just go through one by one. So Manu asked me what my favorite type of analog drawing is. So he means like oil, watercolor, pencil. I do love watercolor painting. I don't do much of it. I haven't done it for years. I like acrylic, but not as much as watercolor. And my sketchbooks that I've been using for the last 5 years or so has just been ballpoint pen. I'm now currently, I was using the crystal Bic pens, like just the most default Bics you could get. But now I'm on for the last year or two, I use the Papermate ones. They're totally blue. You see them in movies and stuff. You just get them at the drugstore, but they've got a really good quality to the ink, where with the Bic they were blobbing and leaking, and it was ruining drawings at that point, where looked like, I would draw it and it would look good, and I'd come back and it looked like somebody just took a pen and just stabbed the page with little black dots everywhere, and it was nasty. But the Papermate ones, they're nice and dry, and they don't do that. So that's what I'd say about these days. It's my favorite one. Alex asks me the most important question: if you could be one color, which color would you be? I don't have a witty answer to that. I don't know what would count as one. If I could be one color, what color would I be? I'm going to take it to imagine if it was almost like if my appearance was that of one color, what it would be. And I would be just all eggshell white. Just it was almost like I had been dipped in eggshell white paint, and then that way it would be a really good primer, like a good base coat. And so if I ever needed to like get a tan or something, or camouflage myself, I'd be ready to go. And I could just paint on my skin any sort of color, and it would just really pop. It would look good. So yeah, eggshell white. That's what color I would be if I was one color. Kevin Blay asks me, do you ever suffer from concept pose slumps in designing characters? If so, how do you personally overcome that? Yes, I do. I do suffer from concept pose slumps in designing characters, and that I call that those slumps R&D fantasy. Every time I come to do a new character, I go to the website and I just peruse over them. I peruse over all of the. They're all collected on rndfantasy.com, but I go over the whole list and I look through and I make sure that I'm not drawing poses I've drawn before exactly. There's going to be a lot of similarity. There's going to be a lot of crossover. There's going to be a lot of characters that stand in similar ways because, like, you know, how many ways can you just stand there holding a sword and look cool? You know, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of built-in ways to look cool. But I do look for that. And so I'm trying to make sure that each one of these characters is totally different, even in pose. How I overcome it is I base it on the character that I'm working on. So no matter what game you're working on, you're never going to have a character that's going to be the same as another character. There's always going to be some details that you can call on. Some sort of trait and characteristic that'll give them a distinction, and that's the sort of the thing that you can tune in on. Like even in the case of Eraamion here, because of his nature, like he's writing in this book all the time. He's writing about his history. He's sort of an investigator. He wanders around and he sort of spies and asks questions. I picture him being almost introverted. I know, even though he does go out and talk to people and ask questions and stuff, and that would stress me out. But I picture him being a little bit more bookish and thoughtful and inward focused or inwardly thinking. So I made him a bit more cloistered up. So he's hugging his book tight and he's not too exuberant, but he's still just friendly. He's just like a friendly, calm, peaceful introvert guy. I know, even though he's probably kicks a lot of ass, but that was my justification for where I went with this. So even if you had like some characters, if you had 3 characters with axes, you've got tons of ways. You could even break it down to things like, okay, I'll have one character holding the axe with 2 hands, and I'll have one character holding the axe with 1 hand. I'll have one character holding the axe over their shoulder. You know, something like that. There's always going to be some way to differentiate how they're doing it. Even just like that one aspect of it. They could even have their footing the same and their chest pointing the same way. But it's always there. And if the character is more extroverted or crazy, that can change the line of direction that the character has got, or if they've got both feet planted, they could be up in the air if they're really kind of off the walls, you know, that sort of thing. But yeah, the way I overcome it is just looking into the character and seeing if there's any sort of clues, whether it's personality or fighting style or what weapon they're using or their age or their alignment. There's always stuff that like you can kind of take and you can signify or stereotype with just like with a pose or an image. Yeah, so if that doesn't help, just let me know on Twitter, and I'll flesh that out more. Thanks, Kevin. Mike Enick asks, this is probably been asked before, but is there a way to download the videos? I don't know if there's an official way, like on YouTube, where there's like a button, like on SoundCloud sometimes, but I'm pretty sure there are websites out there that allow you to, and I don't have a problem with anybody downloading these videos or distributing them or whatever. But if you can find those websites, then go for it. I would probably just look up Google, like YouTube video downloader. I know I've seen stuff like that in the past that do exist, but no official way that I know of. Matthew Weinstein asks me, what is my favorite type of character to draw? I like drawing old, grizzled dudes, so I like drawing dwarves the most. That's the that's the simplest answer. I like drawing dwarves the most. I just like the amount of personality they can get in their faces, and like the big eyebrows and the beards, and they're just sort of funny and good looking. Favorite type of character, yeah, I'd say that. I mean, it's definitely like for me overall personally, it's fantasy. Um, it's like an adventurer type, typically male. I prefer to draw men. I'm just more used to that sort of physique and drawing it. And dwarves are just super rugged, super manly dudes. So they're all beardy and ready to rock. And they're unconventional too. They're not like a human or an elf where they're all long and lithe and whatever. They're all like stocky and gross. And I like drawing characters with wrinkles and pudginess and just a little bit more life experience on their body. Yeah, favorite type of character is definitely dwarf. You could be they're more of like a sweatpants kind of race. You sort of relax when you draw them. You don't have to get too fancy or particular. They're just nice and comfortable. So Jeff Vares asked me something that is a bit of a big doozy of a question. I don't know if I'll be able to answer it, but I'll try. And it's, how is it you took the leap to become a professional illustrator? Was it a gradual evolution, or was it faster than expected? I mean, that's a big question. It is big. It's sort of like the $1,000,000 question. There are things about my journey, you could say, that I'm sure are unique to me, and there's a lot of stuff that seems consistent whenever I talk to people who wind up in this same kind of area. My journey involved, like my first, like most artists, the first sort of stuff you'd get was just, random things online, getting involved in forums. People would hire you to do this or that for $50 or $100, and that was a long time ago. Yeah, just little gigs here and there. And then when I was going into college, you learn a bit more about the industry and how it functions, and you learn stuff about agents and what sort of different companies out there that look for artists and things. And I've never used an agent. I think I might in the future. They sound like a pretty good idea. I know some people have had great success using agents for finding work. But as far as the leap to become a professional illustrator, and I feel like I haven't even really taken that leap until really recently. It was basically for the most part, the trip just involved applying. Just trying to get better and applying to different jobs when they came up and taking whatever you could get. And then that has a snowball effect where every time you add just a small job, it's like a snowball, all these little snowflakes attach. And the more little snowflakes attach, the bigger clumps of other snowflakes it can attach until you get this big ball of snow that's just rolling down, gathering steam and speed, and almost nothing stands in its way at that point. And yeah, I had a job at some game company, and then the next summer I got a job through. We had a BioWare concept art project at the college I was going to, and they don't have it anymore. They've just grown too big as a company. But then they would send down an art director, and they would work on a project with the graduating year, and I was in second year, and so I went down and sort of barged in, and well, not barged in. I waited till the end to let them see my stuff, and I got included in the group that got to go, and that sort of started that that relationship with BioWare and worked with them over the years, um, and then and even then after that ended, I became a teacher, teaching illustration, and then started doing constant contract work at a game company, and then they asked, and then that became I became art director, and like even now I'm not technically an illustrator, even though I do illustration now. I feel like only now have I really become a professional illustrator, or like I'm in that sort of camp. It was a gradual process. It took a long time, and it felt like a long time. But once it happened, it felt like it was quick. It took the leap to become a professional illustrator. I don't know. There was also in those years, there's a lot of jobs where, like, I worked in a parking lot. I remember one winter, I was in a parking lot sweeping. I was 23, I think 22 or 23. I think 22. And I was sweeping snow off of. I was in a parking lot full of trucks, sweeping snow off of the trucks while it was snowing. And there was already 2 feet of snow, and I was by myself for 2 weeks doing that in a massive parking lot. And that was my job. I mean, you got to be willing to do anything and everything to just keep the dream alive, I guess. But just the one thing is just take every little job as it comes and show some tenacity. Like go and get in touch with people. People give up when they see like an application sign or like an email link. But the trick to a lot of success in life is just getting through the hard gray exterior and finding the pink little person inside, like the little vulnerable human with a soul, and just talking to them. Like go inside a building and talk to someone. Wait outside a door, and when someone comes out, talk to them. Don't be creepy about it. But you gotta get through the system. You gotta be the one who wants it more than the others, because being an illustrator is highly sought after. It's competitive, sure, but there's enough variety between everybody that there's so much room for all of us. But yeah, I think even like once you're doing it, you're sort of in. It takes time. It just takes. I mean, everybody's. A lot of people. So many people they already are working hard for it, but I don't really know how to say it. It's just keep moving at it. It's tough because you can't predict. It's not a steady thing. It's not a track. It's not a one-way path. But the one thing that everybody's path has in common is that they never gave up and that they just kept moving and they kept hitting their head up against the wall until it broke. And that's probably the best you're going to get out of me, at least at this point. This would be a good thing to talk about when I've got another artist with me and we can sort of chit-chat back and forth. But anyway, if that doesn't help, let me know. I could maybe, if you have any more specific questions, I could probably get into it a bit as we in the future. So anyway, hope that at least got some of it. Okay, so back to the drawing. Sorry that took a bit of a while here. Putting in a lot more detail since I last looked at it. So I've got a lot of this fancy trim stuff. This was part of the I think the appeal of the concept art that Fruleman sent me. They had a lot of this nice trim, and it helped make it look a lot more official and wizardly as well. As far as this sheath here on the side, it was mentioned the dwarven wand. So in this case, because it sort of had like this war wizard militaristic feel, I was inspired by like my dad has a dagger called a Fairbairn Sykes. It's like a British, I think it's like a paratrooper knife maybe, but it's this big dagger and it has this sheath that's shaped very much like this. I pictured this dwarven sheath as being something made for a big hand, and it's not a super dainty. It is sort of wandish in this sort of like typical like it is sort of very Harry Potterish in a way, I guess. But I just wanted something large and marble just because of its fanciness. If it's going to be inlaid with sapphires, it's not going to just be like granite or just some boring gray stone. So I figured something nice and marbly. But yeah, the sheath is based on a Fairbairn Sykes sheath, so it's it'd be more like a sidearm or something to kind of go with like his investigator sort of coppish soldierishness. That's what I was going for anyway. But yeah, the trim on the thing. I'm also, with this one too, I was trying to go with something definitely elven-y. So, I mean, stereotypically elven-y. So, a lot of these overlapping, curvy, leafy shapes, interlocking and repeating things, and nice and flowery. And I mean, I always talk about how it's nice to try to break those sorts of molds, but sometimes it's just perfect. I mean, when whoever really set the bar for this sort of approach to elves, they were really doing something right. It does work great with elves. I never would want to disparage it. Even though we should always try to come up with our own ways to depict things, and so many people do. So it's good, but nothing says elf. It still just says elves to me so much. So it's nice to just dip in and just go for it. For the pants, I wanted something that was a bit more A standard from like sort of typical pants. I was picturing them being almost like made with something that looked like wet seaweed, but without being wet seaweed. So it's kind of like really strandy leather, silk, something that's a bit alien, but you can still read as pants. It's in there. It does have sort of like a bit of a loincloth, sort of bit of like extra drapery. But I think wizards need baggy pants. Anytime you ever see like a cartoon or a movie or comic or something, and a wizard lifts up their robe and they've got like leotards or pants or something, it ruins the illusion. It just totally breaks the fourth wall. So having something that's a bit more undergarmenty, I think, is good for a magic user to have, something loose and billowy. I think a lot of wizards would be obsessed with comfort, especially because like they don't really wear armor. There's no point in armor that much when you're super good at magic. So if you're going to be wearing cloth, you may as well be wearing really comfortable cloth. And even for the feet down here, I just wanted to make them, rather than super standard boots, I'll just give them a little bit of an elfish sort of treatment with, I know it's a terrible stereotype, but pointy toes. I think it'll work out good. But I imagine them having a sole of some sort of like brown leather that's sort of cut down and then stitched around. So there's that. It looks sort of like a heel spike, but really it's just sort of like a lip shooting out where the two sides sort of come together, making an edge. But yeah, white hair. White hair is tough. Still got a long way to go with white hair, but it gathers color. It takes color from its surrounding, and it does have its own innate color. It gets sort of grayish, like a warm gray, like a brownish. It does take on a yellowiness as it gets denser and deeper, but not too much. And it seems to be quite variable. I mean, you can find references of all types of different gray hair, it seems. There's not really one exact perfect way to do it. So as far as this book goes, this is his magic-y book. It is a very big book, but it's not. But I wanted it to not just be like a regular book shape book. I mean, it's rectangular and everything because it's just the most effective way to transport paper. But it's got an asymmetrical cover. So like on the part near his shoulder is like the front cover is only about like a quarter of the whole width, and so it doesn't open on the spine. It opens in the middle, sort of like a. I've seen checkbooks kind of that open in a similar way. And then it has a strap around it for slinging over his shoulder. So I just wanted something that could still be interpreted as a book, but wasn't just a one-to-one book. Whenever I picture a fantasy book, I picture like something from World of Warcraft, and you probably do as well. Um, but whenever I have a really obvious, clear idea right off the bat, I am become very skeptical of it immediately. And because once something comes to me really obviously, my assumption is that other people have come up with it too. And if anything, I could actually probably rant about that a little bit, but I think that's a part of like where I get my ideas from, where it's like selfishness and not wanting to share my little clubhouse. So if that's sort of, it's probably like my own weird little complex or disorder, but yeah, when I come up with something right away, then I doubt its originality, and so I need to take that and then tweak that idea. And so that sort of, like, I don't think my ideas are really original or amazing or anything, but when I do that, I feel confident that not many people have done it before, which I think is like, that's the dream of the concept artist. That's the job of the concept artist, is to make something that people haven't thought of or considered or seen before, and something, and sort of like a fresh take. And whether it's the case or not, the fact that it makes it feel that way is part of the rewarding aspect of this job. And so that's one of the things that I do when I work. I suppose that's sort of what you could say that's the dragon I'm chasing. So yeah, just an old book strap, tied on both ends though. Picture it something he could just throw over his shoulder, or even a sling across his chest. Typically with like a book strap, it's just like a belt on one end that hangs out loose, and you'd see like kids on like shows set in like 1900, and they'd be walking to the schoolhouse and they'd have their books in a weird cluster or in a weird bunch and slung it over their shoulder. And it was always so weird to me, because why didn't they just use backpacks? But they didn't have backpacks back then. So this is the reference to the symbol of the purple dragon. I'm imagining this being part of a larger motif that would involve something with large wings across the back. Because I with all the patterns and stuff and all the different bits of fabric, I wouldn't want to cram like wings across the chest in those tiny little areas, or try to cram it in there. So being able to, I just wanted to hint at this thing. So it's more like a Chinese sort of dragon, like very snake-like and serpentine and wavy. But I wanted to imply there's more that's going to be going on with this dragon thing. So that, that squiggly line could be anything, so got to put in a little bit of a foot, and then that kind of helps sell it a little bit more and push it in that direction. So the symbol is still there, but we're just not seeing it. And then sort of a raised, I wanted to have it look a bit more like a bit of a raised silk sort of thing. So it's going to have a different shininess aspect to it from the fabric surrounding it. So by doing that, I would have taken the color for the purple, drawn the shape of the dragon, and then made a new color that would be the highlight color on a new layer above it, and make it a clipping mask, and then add it, and it would only affect the purpley color that made the original shape of the dragon. And because I didn't include the hawk, I just sort of tore up the shoulder pad a little bit, sort of thinking that might be like the shoulder that he always lands on. So I wanted to give at least a little bit of a hint to the hawk familiar. Familiars just take a lot of time. They take not even it depends on who they are. And then just this back here, I just wanted to imply a little bit more of like some writing utensils, or he does carry extra stuff, so I just had like a little pen case with some quill nibs sticking out the end. I just wanted to imply some preparedness stuff for him. What was I just? Oh yeah, the familiars. Yeah, familiars, like the animals that they take quite a while, and birds especially. Birds you gotta get really right, and I'm not used to them, so I mean, plus like if you set the if you make it okay for everybody's familiar to get drawn, like some people have tigers and griffins and bears and dragons and stuff for their familiars. So I can't afford to draw everybody's. I just don't have the time to draw everybody's familiars. So it was nice to be able to hint at that at least. I hope that Fruleman accepts that. Nope, you can't hear the sound of my cat bathing himself. He's right beside my microphone. So if you hear any weird looking sounds, it's him licking his kneecap right now. So I hope that doesn't bother you. Yeah, lots of trim. It's got to look fancy. I find that I like to give elves a little bit of a sideburn, sort of bit of hair hanging down in front of their ears. Even like in real life, whenever I see a guy with long hair, or even women with long hair and they have some hair hanging down there, to me it just looks more elven. It could just be me, but I think there's something to it. But if they have their hair pulled back, that's almost more like a human way of wearing their hair. But when it goes down, I think that's more elvy. And that could just be me being an insane person. But that's how I see it. Yeah, I want to give it a bit of the trim some of a metallic finish. I don't know if this would actually be metal or if it's just some like silver or golden thread put in with this with all this edging work or piping or whatever it would be called. It's just nice to have that extra bit of stuff. I've done this a few times before, having this backwards rim lighting, but after seeing Joy do it in her work, I definitely wanted to make sure that I included it. It's a fun little stage, and it adds a lot for how little work it is. It's great to have that extra little punch of light from the back. You only need a little bit of it too sometimes. And I didn't want to skimp out. The description did include a bow, so I wanted to just include one back here, but something worn much more asymmetrically, just as like a graphical element. The little attachments here at the bottom, I wanted it splayed open because it has, to me, like a Scandinavian sort of Norse feeling, and then the two little knobs make it feel a bit more ornate and instrumental, like a violin or something. The other end is just a spike that I'd imagine would be useful. You know, it could be used for just he could mount it on the ground, put it up against a tree. You could use it as just like a random pokey thing. You know, why not just have a poke on the end of a thing? If it's not hurting anybody, just put a poke. I'd rather have a bow with a poke than a bow with no poke. And to include the string. I always feel weird just having a simple line for the string, so I like to add in usually like dampeners or like those little beads, just to give it a little bit more texture and life to it. Because if it was just the 2 or 3 pixel line across, it would just feel a bit too sterile, and that's no good for fantasy stuff. But anyway, this was Eraamion Firal for the weekly free character art lottery. This was for Fruleman, and so every week I'm holding these on. Check me out on Twitter at R&D Fantasy, and every Monday and Sunday I let you know what hashtag to tweet, and then the winners are picked on Tuesdays. and I draw your original free fantasy pen and paper tabletop RPG characters free of charge. And as long as they fit that criteria, you're allowed to participate. Anyway, hope you liked watching it, and hope it helped. Thanks, everyone.